White people fear black men. That's not fair, but it's true.
There was a real fear that if you let blacks get control, everything would change. And there was no, with some people, there was no idea that there would be any fairness or any democracy or anything, that there would be a decent, well-run city government, county government, whatever. It was like, if this happens, we're lost. And it was just a terrible fear.
Hey, what's up, fam? How you doing? I hope you're doing super great from wherever you're watching us from. As you know, these are present agentic stories, and I'm hoping that you're doing fine. Now, for the longest time, they have always tried to make us revere them so much. They have written history, they have, deliberately changed things in history so that we get to fear them because of the things that they did, while in reality, they are the ones who fear us. They fear black people. They fear black people. That's why they're always concealing the true history. They fear black people. That's why they're doing this. Now, I want to discuss with you a concept that I feel like it's important just before jumping right into the video. Now, you need to understand that the fear that many white people have towards black people is, a deeply ingrained sociopolitical and psychological construct rather than a natural or a rational response. It is a product of historical conditioning, systemic power structures, and the need to justify racial hierarchies. And you get to look scholars like Dr. Khalil Gibran Muhammad, author of The Condemnation of Blackness. He argues that in his book, Condemnation of Blackness, he argues that this fear is not merely an emotional reaction, but a deliberately ideological weapon used to sustain white supremacy. These fear manifest in different ways, first ranging from criminalization to economic exclusion, despite black people's persistent struggles for equality and justice. Right. And now you need to understand that the construction of black people as a threat dates back to the era of slavery and colonialism, where the white elites needed the justification of the exploitation of African labor. In The Invention of White Race, Theodore W. Allen details how racial divisions were deliberately created to prevent class solidarity between poor whites and black laborers. The image of dangerous black man, was cultivated through laws, policies, and cultural narratives that depicted black people as innately violent or hypersexual. This trope persists in modern media, reinforcing a subconscious biases that white population internalize from an early age. And you get to realize that these are all projections of black fear, right? For the longest time, that's what have been happening. Now, I want us to watch this video. It's gonna be an educational video that I would like you to watch. I would like you to have a glimpse of really how white folks fear black people, right? And if you're a white person who's watching this video, probably you jump in it. Tell me what's your experience with all this. For those who are watching us for the first time, kindly welcome to the channel. For those who are always coming back to watch my videos, I'm so much thankful, man. You don't know how you're doing. For those who are supporting me through my Cash App, through my super thanks, trust me, I am so much appreciative for what you're doing. Now let's watch the video. I'll be back, and then we're going to be having a great discussion in regards to this.
That a lot of the we'll talk about police brutality. I feel a lot of white men are scared of black men because of their lack of exposure to black men or people of color. I'm not scared of black men. I'm not scared of Latino men. I've been around them my whole life, right? But I feel a white officer might be around a black guy and he feels that emotion. He's scared of the black guy. And next thing you know, the black guy runs. He's got to shoot him because he has the power, because he can pull it out of his pants, and he shoots the guy. And I feel that happens over and over and over again, that white men are just scared or intimidated by black men for no other reason than that the color of their skin. And it's really the ignorance and the lack of exposure to those people.
Yeah, I find that interesting that the only thing that seems to scare white people are black men. Literally, they swim with the sharks. They hunt. They go in the mountains and hike with the bears. They go to safaris and hang out with the tigers and the lions. I mean, literally, they go into the ocean and they find these indescribable ocean being.
They jump off a 1,000-foot cliff.
They jump off of cliffs, they skydive. I mean, literally, white people do everything you can imagine that would kill them. And the one thing that only scares them is black. And that's unfortunate because our history as black people does not reflect in any way factually that we are a violent people. And I believe Minister Farrakhan said that the best when he said, we don't have a history of killing you.
When you watch the video of the black men killed by white cops in Louisiana and Minnesota, it brings us into a need for soul searching in the country. All the things Bill Clinton did and said, one of the profound things he ever said at the end of his administration was, on race, we have to get to the roots of black pain and the roots of white fear. Clinton, a white kid from the South, had seen everything. And white fear is that you walk down the street, like Barack Obama said about his white grandparents, and they're afraid because they have black men walking about 30 feet behind them. Black pain, you've been stopped for no reason while walking to the mall, or you've been asked by an usher at a basketball game to show your ticket when the 4 white friends from the office sitting next to you don't have the usher ask them for their tickets. That's black pain and white fear, and together you could see it with these cop incidents. The white cops in Minnesota and in Louisiana showed fear on their faces. In Minnesota, because the gentleman said he had a permit for a concealed carry, and we went for his wallet, the cop shot him. And the cop was more unhinged than the African-American girlfriend, who remained calm. In Louisiana, somebody shouted he has a gun. You could see the white fear on the face of the cop as he pulled his gun out and shot him in the chest. Dick Gregory, who was an African-American comedian back in the early 60s, once said about racism in the North and South, there's racism in both places. In the South, you can get close to white people, but just don't get too big. In the North, you can get as big as you want, but just don't get too close. We still have racism in this country. We have to get to the roots of black pain and white fear, or more of these things will happen, and it'll keep happening.
White people fear black men. That's not fair, but it's true. What makes this even more unfair is that in the vast majority of cases, our fear of black men is in no way connected to our personal experience. And if that wasn't unfair enough, study after study has shown, you know this, that fear of black men doesn't even spring primarily from racism. It's deeper than that. And that's not fair to black people or white people. Most black men have experienced what some people refer to as the fearful gaze of white men and women. Then on the other side of the equation is this: the majority of African Americans in our country, they don't trust the criminal justice system, do you? I mean, you fear the police. That's not fair. Facts don't care. The white people who have all but silenced their fear of black men are the white people who have befriended black men or have been befriended by black men and their families. I've been to my share of, far right-leaning churches and churches that lean far left, and it's so much easier for those pastors. I mean, everybody pretty much agrees on everything, and everybody else, everybody else is just going to hell, right? It is not enough not to be a racist. It is not enough not to be a racist. Non-racist is not the goal. Being non-racist does nothing to address racism.
Rich, who again is a fairly liberal columnist, and wrote a piece, I think it was in the New York Times, right after or right before the election, where he said that, basically racism is not a problem anymore because when white folks get to know black folks, well, their biases and their fears subside. Now, number one, I'm not sure that's true. But secondly, even if it were true, the truth is, given the history of racism, spatial segregation, residential isolation, the fact that 85% of white folks live in communities with virtually no people of color around, even if he were right, it wouldn't matter because most white folks won't get that opportunity to actually form close, intimate friendships or connections with people of color. And unfortunately, if it isn't happening, the only way we get to know folks of color is via media. So maybe we see Barack Obama on television coming into our living rooms every night. And over an 18-month to 2-year period, we're able to say, yeah, I sort of like that guy. He seems really capable and really bright. Maybe I wasn't sure at first, but given 2 years, he was able to overcome, maybe my first impression. But the only other folks we're seeing in the media are either folks who are sort of superstars on the one hand, or criminals, on the other hand. Those are the black folks we typically see on TV. They're either like mega millionaire athletes or entertainers, or they're the folks doing a perp walk on the 6 o'clock news that the cops have just gone arrested and haven't even let them put a shirt on before cuffing them and bringing them out in front of the cameras. If the only people you see regularly are superstar millionaires and thugs, for the average person, they can't relate to either of those, right? The average person of color can't, and the average white person can't either. The superstar, you're likely to envy their position, and the thug you're afraid of. And envy and fear are not particularly good human emotions upon which to base some personal connections or intimate relationships. So I think that's what we're dealing with. You know, Barack Obama or Bill Cosby or Oprah Winfrey or a handful of people of color, we're able to get to know them, or at least we think we know them, via media. But for average everyday white folks and for average everyday black and brown folks, the ability to really get to know each other and overcome those implicit biases is a lot more rare.
White people are scared to death right now, particularly white males. They're scared to death that they are going to lose their power in the future. And they are. But if you want to get ready for the future, if you want to be treated well in the future, treat others well in the present.
There was a real fear that if you let blacks get control, everything would change. And there was no, with some people, there was no idea that there would be any fairness or any democracy or anything, you know, that there would be a decent, well-run city government, county government, whatever. It was like, if this happens, we're lost. And it was just a terrible fear. Southerners are like any other group of people. I mean, there are all kinds of folks that are included. And regardless of where they stood on integration or anything else, there were a lot of really good people who made wrong decisions and not so much did wrong things as failed to do right things. And when you look back on it, try to sort it out and figure out what could have been different. I think one of the things is that people felt a sense of being powerless. Maybe people who would have been willing to go along and go further and move forward sooner wouldn't have had any notion of any way that they could impact this, or that anything that they could personally do that would be helpful. You know, even as now, most of us live in a society that we think is far from perfect, and yet between now and 2 weeks from now, we're probably not going to do very much to change it, partly because we have no sense of what we could do. And in the South, it was that way. Even people who were willing to take risk and move out were just not able to visualize what kinds of things could help. Or, you know, how would you get enough people, if everybody that was willing to go to a certain step would move at once, then it would be accomplished. But we were all scattered out there. Nobody knew who else was willing to do what or make what changes. And there was not a lot of leadership. And leadership in the churches was, a lot of it was really forward-thinking and helpful, and then a lot of it was people who knew what the right thing to do was but were terrified of taking any stand that would upset the congregation. There were people in the churches who wanted to keep the peace in the local church, you know, in the congregation, and so they didn't want to do anything that might cause any kind of dissension. Politicians, even people who knew better, who would have been willing to go further personally or to have the state move forward, were always bound by fear of not getting reelected. And so really people who knew better just stuck with racism for political reasons, is what I think. You know, it was, but a lot of it just in average citizens was just that people didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to help. There still are a lot of strange myths floating around in the South. There were a lot of strange tales from Reconstruction. There's an awful lot of fiction that floats about, and so I have no idea what kind of weird notions people had, but mostly I think it is of losing control. You know, I mean, there was some higher level of trust, even of dishonest or corrupt white politicians, than of a black in some position of authority over you, for people who had grown up with these myths and fears, so that it was easier to stick with somebody that you might not have even cared for who was white. I know that there were people who actually became physically ill every time there was any big desegregation news. I mean, you could just count on it. If you went to their house, you knew they were going to be in bed. It really just was. This was after I was a grown woman, and it was pretty startling to me to discover that there were people that had that kind of, that were bound in that way to racism. But of course, there are people who are a lot worse that I didn't happen to know personally. For me, there's a lot of guilt that's involved, because growing up, if you grow up and accept things the way they are, then you have to wonder, why did you accept all of this? Why did you not question more, or why didn't you think about all these things that were happening? And I don't know what the answer to that is. My great-grandfather was a really good man, but he was really a racist also. He, I guess, was influenced a lot by things that happened during Reconstruction. And he was never a violent person, nor was he. It wasn't something that he spent a lot of time thinking about or talking about, but his views were, I remember, mainly his never quite forgiving the Methodist Church for reuniting. There was a Southern Methodist Church for a while, and he didn't think they should have gone back in with the Northern Methodist Church. There were a lot of really good people who were and are racist, and I don't know how you explain or justify, or a lot of people wouldn't even accept the fact that you can be both, but in my belief you can. For instance, there were a lot of people who were willing to accept, when Emmett Till was murdered, there were people who were willing to accept the fact that this was, I don't remember if they said it was a prank or what, but I mean, there were stories that this didn't really happen before they found the body, and there were people who were willing to accept that. There were the same kind of attitude was with almost everything, where there was not an immediate finding of a body. There was always this thing, this is something somebody's made up, just a lot of denial. A lot of people who didn't want to believe that this sort of thing would happen, and would refuse to accept the fact that it was happening. I think there were a lot of people who did think it would be stopped, who never thought the change would actually happen, even after it was happening. And I think if there had not been that attitude, if people had known the change was going to happen anyhow, maybe it would have been faster. Maybe the holding the line would not have been so long and painful. But I think that part of the reason that there was not more change is just that people never did accept it as the reality of the day.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing super great, as we agreed. Now, you've heard the perspective of all those white folks who try to share the perspective in regards to how they've always felt a strong sense of fear wherever they had or they were close to, black folks. And now in my presentation, I'm also going to be discussing psychological projection and white guilt. Another explanation lies in the psychological phenomenon of projection. Probably you know Dr. Joy DeGray. Dr. Joy DeGray, in her work Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, he argues that white fear is partly a subconscious acknowledgement of historical wrongdoing. Many white individuals, knowingly or unknowingly, project their own historical acts of violence onto black people, assuming that if the roles were reversed, black people would seek retribution. Right? And this psychological displacement results in a perpetual state of white anxiety regarding black power, self-determination, and resistance. Also get to realize and understand the role of racialized policing and mass incarceration amongst the things that have always been pushed towards black folks. And even today, these are things that are still happening. And I feel like it's important for us to, get to have a discussion of this. Now, one of the most visible manifestation of white fear is in the policing and the criminal justice system. Look at the works of Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, which illustrates how the mass incarceration of black people serves as a modern mechanism to control and contain them. White fear is institutionalized through policies such as stop and frisk redlining and voter suppression, which operates under the assumption that black people pose a fundamental risk to social stability. Even when crime rates do not support such assumptions, the media reinforces these narratives, creating a self perpetuating cycle of racial suspicion. Um, we also get to see economic anxiety and the black advancement threat. When we talk about this, we look at things that happen to, the black Wall Street, right? These things happen. They destroyed the black Wall Street, the Tulsa massacre. I mean, get to look at them, right? Now, the economic anxiety and the black advancement threat. White fear is not just about physical safety. It also extends to economic and political power. The black advancement threat theory explains how white anxieties increases when black people make economic gains or enter space traditionally reserved for white elites. Look at the works of W.E. Du Bois, the concept of the concept of the white wage of whiteness, the wages of whiteness, right? Which highlights how white identity has historically been tied to economic privilege. The civil rights movements, affirmative action, and black entrepreneurship are one often met with resistance, not because they disadvantage white people materially, but because they challenge the racial hierarchies that provides them with psychological and social benefits, right? And also you get to check the fear of black unity and organization. For the longest time, the black formed groups in one way or another, they'll always try to find a way to sabotage it, to, make it not work, right? The historical suppression of black political movements from the Black Panthers to assassination to leaders like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., all this reveals how white, fears intensify when black people organize collectively. Dr. Cloud Anderson outlines in his works Powernomics, the greatest threat to white dominance is black economic and political self-sufficiency. White fear is less about black success and more about potential of black collective empowerment, which could disrupt the racial status quo. And it is true because when black people really get to business, these in turn will make white folks to fear. And when you look at the works of Dr. Cloud Anderson, when you get to check Powernomics, there's a place he says that black people are still not going to be rising until they realize that they need economic integration, they need political integration. Two of them, when they combine, social integration itself, it's okay. He said that social integration is okay, but it's not enough, right? We need political integration. We need economic integration. All these duo will make black people stand a chance against all the oppressive nature of the United States. We're also going to be looking at the myth of white victimhood. A modern extension of this fear is the rise of white victimhood narratives. Concepts like reverse racism and white genocide emerge from an existential fear that demographic changes will lead to loss of white privilege and power. Scholars like Eddie Cloud Jr. discusses how these sentiments fuel reactionary politics, where policies aimed at racial equity are framed as anti-white oppression, right? This fear is irrational, yet it drives significant political and social resistance to racial progress. We're also going to be seeing cultural appropriation and fear of black influence. Paradoxically, while white fear of black people is prevalent, so it is the cultural appropriation of black aesthetics. Talk about music innovations, right? These contradictions stems from the tension between admiration and anxiety. White societies have historically desired black creativity while fearing black autonomy. This dynamic reflects what Frantz Fanon describes as in black skin, white masks as the desire to consume blackness without acknowledging black humanity. The desire to consume whiteness without acknowledging black humanity. Get to look at the work of Frantz Fanon in his work, Black Skin, White Mask. I'm also going to be talking about the media's role in perpetuating fear. The mainstream media plays a crucial role. in amplifying white fear through racialized reportings, right? The overrepresentation of black crime stories, the demonstration of black activists, and reporting of white violence create a distorted perception of reality. Scholars argue that these media biases serves as a political purpose, reinforcing racial divisions that keep working class fragmented and distracted from systematic inequality that affects all poor and working class people, right? And so we need to take time and really understand, you know, this concept of white fear because it has always been manifesting in front of black folks, but we didn't have a chance to get look and really understand what happened. So, as you know, these are presented Gintech stories, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. But until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.